Colonel Woods did not want to be in this fight. He would have preferred to be at home in San Marcos with his wife, Georgia. But here he was, dodging Yankee bullets, leading the 32nd Regiment of the Texas Cavalry at some place called Yellow Bayou in Louisiana. And now he was right in the middle of 40,000 men shooting at each other. The Union Army had moved over 30,000 troops from New Orleans. The Red River Campaign occurred toward the end of the Civil War, during April and May of 1864. The 32nd Regiment was made up of men from the Central Texas area who had enlisted under Dr. Peter Woods, a family physician running a small plantation outside San Marcos, and had not seen much action. They were not part of the large battles already fought in this war, and many of them realized that the South would lose, and they were all ready to just go back home. If only they survived Yellow Bayou.
How bad is it? Oh, it's my arm! Oh! Doc! I done stopped a Yankee bullet in my arm.
What happened?
Oh.
Get up here.
It didn't go through, but it's still stuck in there. Oh!
Look at it. It's going to hurt a little bit.
Oh.
Let's see. Let me examine this.
Oh.
All right. It's going to hurt a little bit.
Oh, hurry up.
Okay.
Oh. Get it out, Doc.
Not a problem.
I don't want to lose my arm.
You're not going to lose it. Get it out with my fingers. It's not that deep.
The small, round lead ball struck Colonel Woods at his left wrist and traveled up his left arm and exited at his elbow. He would never have the full use of his left arm for the rest of his life.
All right, I got it.
You got it? Just tie this off right quick.
All right. Oh, you did a good job, Doc. Thank you. Yeah, we saw bones are all right.
Can't wait till this thing's over when we both get back to real practice.
Yeah.
All right, let's get up. Stuart.
Give me a hand there, Stuart. Okay.
Peter Woods was born in Shelbyville, Tennessee in December 1819. Peter and his brother grew up with his grandparents after his father, the local sheriff, was killed and his mother remarried. He traveled with them to Mississippi and then entered the Louisville Medical Institute in Kentucky in 1840 to begin his medical training, graduating in 1842. Woods returned to Mississippi and there met and married Georgia Ann Virginia Lachey in Water Valley in Yalobusha County in 1846. He became a successful country doctor. The 1850 United States Census lists the Woods with 2 children, $1,500 in real estate, and 16 slaves. In 1851, the Woods family joins a wagon train and heads west to Texas. His father-in-law, Louis Lachey, is also traveling with them, along with the Charles Koch family.
When they got to San Marcos, that was a beautiful part of Texas, And Dr. Woods felt like that would be the part that he would like to settle, is at San Marcos, and at the time they needed a physician. So that was a wonderful opportunity for him to settle in San Marcos, and he bought 1,000 acres of land between Kyle and San Marcos, and between Martindale and San Marcos. His section of land wasn't in one place, it was in several places.
I believe that Dr. Woods in Georgia owned large tracts of land. Some of them they owned with Louis Lachey, her father. And they had pieces of land in the hill country, in the San Marcos area, possibly around Fentress, and then they had a house on the Blanco River just out of San Marcos on what would be now I-35. And they were believed to have owned land from Hays County up to Onion Creek.
Peter purchases a large farm known as High Plains, located between the Blanco and San Marcos rivers, where they grow cotton, wheat, barley, potatoes, cabbage, and corn, along with breeding cattle and pigs. Cotton was the main cash crop. 4 additional children are born during this time. He is also the only doctor in San Marcos, but his main focus is in running the farm. By the time of the 1860 U.S. Census, the Woods family is showing a personal wealth of almost $15,000 with 27 slaves. His occupation is listed as farmer, but this farmer knows there is trouble brewing in the country, and his real concern is about maintaining the South's way of life. Cotton is the main cash crop, but it requires intense labor supplied by slaves. Following the election of President Lincoln in 1860, Southern states started seceding from the Union. Texas votes to join the Confederacy in February of 1861, and the Civil War breaks out in April with the Southern attack on Fort Sumter.
Boys, I ask you here to this meeting, I want to form a cavalry troop.
Dr. Woods decides to form a cavalry company and asks men he knows with horses and guns to meet him at a training camp on the Salado, south of San Marcos, in March 1862. The unit was made up of around 80 men.
You boys with me?
Yeah. Doctor, I got a question for you.
Yes, sir.
How long do you reckon this conflict's gonna last?
I don't know. It may be months, maybe even years.
Several more companies formed, and together they become the 32nd Texas Volunteer Cavalry, C.S.A.
Texas in 1861 was remote to most of the nation, yet it was front and center in the national imagination in many ways. The reason being is that it was the gateway to the Pacific, it was the gateway to Mexico. It represented the future of the nation in many ways. And so while Texas was a long way from places like Virginia or Tennessee, the control of Texas and the role that Texas would play in the war was actually deceptively large. Now, Colonel Woods' regiment was one of the last regiments raised during the course of the war. It's just ahead of conscription, and it's really cobbled together from a bunch of independent companies that were raised in central Texas and in the hill country, essentially around San Antonio, San Marcos, as far east as Bastrop, New Braunfels. And so these companies are thrown together into a regiment whose primary task will be to patrol the Texas frontier and also patrol the Texas-Mexican frontier.
Dr. Woods served as captain of his company. The 32nd was made up of 10 companies, all with men from within a 50-mile radius of San Antonio. Woods' 15-year-old son came with him, and both served the remainder of the war. The 10 companies are formed into a regiment, and these men vote for their commander. Woods is selected as the colonel of the 32nd. He is now leading approximately 950 men and horses into battle.
The men who wanted to follow Dr. Woods into the Civil War all gathered at Stringtown to put together the Texas 32nd. People didn't know how bad the war was going to be then. They had no idea how terrible and the kind of sacrifices they were going to make. So the whole atmosphere was very festive, almost like a picnic or a carnival or a huge barbecue. There were banners in the trees, there were big tables laden with food, and the young women dressed themselves in their fineries, but 2 young women who were twins had made a flag for Dr. Woods, and one of them even replicated his uniform. Her name was Ella Reeves Dupree Ogletree, and she ultimately became the second Mrs. Woods. The way I heard the story about it, one woman to another, was that his daughters had been outraged at how much she had flirted with Dr. Woods on that day that they gathered at Stringtown. And then after the death of the first wife, Georgia Lachey, sometime after that, respectful amount of time, he married one of the twin girls that had been at all the excitement of the departure of the troops at the beginning of the war.
The 32nd was assigned to guard the southern coast of Texas along the Rio Grande and protect wagons of cotton being delivered to Mexico for sale. It was standard patrol work and nothing like the destruction going on in Virginia.
We think of the frontier as being an Indian frontier, but Texas has several frontiers. The Indian frontier, to be sure, but also you have the international frontier and then the coastal frontier. So these are the guys that are watching all the exits from Texas. And that's what they spend the first 2 years of the war doing.
That situation changed when Northern General Banks landed troops in Galveston. Colonel Woods is ordered to protect the coast from Corpus Christi north to the Red River at the Louisiana border. It was a huge stretch of land, and Woods kept receiving conflicting orders of where he was to be and how he was to get there. By now, it is the fall of 1863, and the Confederacy was having trouble feeding the troops, much less the horses. The 32nd Cavalry received orders for its men to dismount and release their horses. 200 of the regiment decided to just take the horses and head for home. Woods was ordered to go after the deserters and bring them back. He reported back to headquarters that no one had been given any time off in the last 2 years and requested a leave to visit his wife. He then wrote letters giving the 200 men a month's leave, requesting them to come back when the time was up. All returned.
The thing that really sets up the Red River Campaign is the fall of Vicksburg and Port Hudson. The loss of the lower Mississippi River, the control of the Mississippi Valley by the federal forces, meant that those armies, Grant's Army of the Mississippi, Banks's Army of the Gulf, now are looking for a new project. There's only one route left. They're coming up the Red River and they're going to hit Alexandria, and then they're going to keep trucking from Alexandria all the way to Shreveport. And that's what they're going to do to collapse the Trans-Mississippi. Now, the Confederates had spent the fall of 1863 fortifying Shreveport. They understood that that was going to be the last bastion.
The 32nd is ordered to join other regiments under Confederate General B and depart for the Red River on the Louisiana border. Woods realizes that his regiment is now part of a much larger campaign. A division of Confederate cavalry, with about 9,000 troops under the command of General Tom Green, is gathering near Blair's Landing in Louisiana. The Union Army has also moved thousands of troops into the western edge of Louisiana along the Red River. It was at this point that Colonel Woods received his strangest command of the war. He was to lead the 32nd Cavalry in an attack on Union ironclad gunboats at Blair's Landing. The Union Navy had moved several armored troop transports and metal ironclads up the Red River from the Gulf of Mexico. This was some of the latest and best technology developed during the war, and the Confederate cavalry was asked to attack.
Colonel Woods and his regiment are late coming to the party. They had the furthest distance to travel, and by the time they get to northwestern Louisiana, the battles of Mansfield and Pleasant Hill have passed. And so they get there just for the kind of cleanup effort afterwards, but they're unbloodied, relatively fresh, other than a very long march. And so they're immediately tapped to be thrown into the pursuit. And so veteran Confederate commander, Major General Tom Green, said, fresh meat. Let's get these guys to line the banks of the Red River, and we'll just keep leapfrogging these regiments down the banks of the Red River, and we will just make life miserable for the United States Navy as it's retreating. We'll shoot through the gun ports. When we get artillery, field artillery up, we'll shoot through their wooden transports. This will be a great way to make them pay for this campaign. So at the Battle of Blair's Landing, Tom Green takes these guys that have never really been in a gunboat fight before and says, all right, I want y'all to run up to the bank of the river and pour it in on them. And these guys understand the concept. It's not real complicated. You shoot at the boats. But there's one particular boat that's going to make it a little difficult.
The cavalry is asked to dismount, but the officers stay on horseback at the edge of the river. The cavalry sends heavy musket fire toward the Union gunboat and the troops being transported as passengers. Confederate General Green, never one to hold back, leads his troops into battle and is immediately killed with a cannonball to the head.
Men, follow me!
Some of the men that were there at the fight claimed that Greene was drunk. And that's the only way that you would attack a Union gunboat, especially an ironclad, was if you were pretty liquored up. And Greene had earned a reputation during the course of the war for being liquored up at high crisis times of high stress. But whether or not he was liquored up doesn't matter. That was the tactic that army was to use by order of General Taylor. Richard Taylor is the commander of the Confederate forces in Louisiana. So look, you don't need to fear gunboats. We can shoot them up. They'd been shooting them up during the entire course of the war. This was going to be no different. And they have several notable successes. But sometimes the gunboats gave a lot more than they got. And that was exactly what happened at Blair's Landing.
Back in San Marcos, Georgia was holding things together by continuing to farm cotton and sell it to Mexico. She runs the Union blockade at the border of Mexico and is successful with her cotton sales. Georgia and Peter write to each other often, she explaining how things were going at home and Peter saying he wishes he was home.
Dear Dr. Peter, this leaves us all well, but very lonely. Home was never so lonely. Last spring, when you first left us, I lived in the garden and took a great deal of active exercise. Now, I have sewing to do. I feel as though I could hardly live here anymore, but I will not trouble you with unnecessary complaining. Good night. As ever, your devoted wife, G.V. Woods, October 26th, 1862.
My dear wife, be sure to attend the smallpox vaccinations of all hands, black and white. God bless my wife and little ones. P.C. Woods, January 18, 1862.
Dear Dr. Peter, I shall never get used to your being away from home. You are missed so much. I hardly know how to address a letter to you. It does not come natural for me to say anything but Dr. Peter. You must excuse me. Affectionately, G.V. Woods.
My dear wife, try to preserve your health as well as you can. I fear you have too much to do for your constitution. I would enjoy a visit home so much. I am exceedingly wearied of the war. What outcome could possibly be worth all this desolation and death? Your husband, P.C. Woods.
My dear husband, I need your counsel and your advice very often. Affectionately, G.V. Woods.
My darling Georgia, I shall be 45 years old, at which age every man should be permitted to retire to private life. If I should not get home soon, you must take care of yourself, as I expect many days of pleasure with you, even in our old age. Your husband, P.C. Woods, February 17th, 1864.
Dear Dr. Peter, I am trying to manage home affairs as best I can. Your horses are beginning to fall off and scatter. I will not commence sowing grass until Saul gets home, and it will take a little time to get the cotton out. I hope we have a good crop season. I am having wheat sowed now, and I will try to get ready to plant corn by the first day of February. We had a very little rain this winter, and if we don't plant early, I feel we won't make crops or corn. As ever, your devoted wife, G.V. Woods, January 24th, 1864.
The Civil War ended in April 1865 at Appomattox. Woods had protected his men during the war, prevented as many deaths as possible, and came back across to central Texas to disband the unit where they had started.
When they came back to San Marcos, all the soldiers were pretty disillusioned. And they just had to start from the beginning, just start from scratch to build up their farms because they'd been neglected for so long.
He divided up his plantation, giving freedom to his slaves along with a part of the land that they had worked. He was involved in politics, traveling to Austin for legislative actions and serving as chair of the Hays County Democratic Convention.
At the end of the war, they held a constitutional convention in Austin to conform with the federal government and the other states and began ruling the state of Texas again. Dr. Woods was asked to be a part of that convention. The Army of Occupation wanted to take over their house, indeed ordered them out of their beautiful house at the top of the hill in San Marcos. Came as a big shock to the family. But it was clear that they wanted to take over the house as a power stroke.
It's my duty to inform you that this house has been designated as headquarters for the officers, and you all must leave today.
Well, the family took great offense to that, but Dr. Woods was gone, and they didn't have his wise counsel about not getting so upset about it, but the women were really bent out of shape and angry about it. Another aspect of the story that made it complex was that the slave woman, Martha Benny Hawkins Lachey, who was a member of the family and a first cousin of Dr. Woods' wife, ran down toward the lead horse of the ranking officer coming up the hill and started grabbing at his bridle of his horse. A real no-no for a man on a horse. For a woman, much less a slave woman, to be screaming at him and saying, "You think you're going to take over this house and live there? You think you're as good as these people, but you are not good enough to sweep the dirt under their feet." Well, he pulled out a pistol and started pistol whipping Martha Benny. When Sweet Woods Montgomery, who was watching from the upstairs balcony, saw that, she grabbed up the rifle and again was trying to stop what was happening by shooting over the heads of Martha Benny and the commanding officer. The perfect thing to do was to abuse the women, and that's the term my father used. He abused the women, and therefore they decided that they would kill him. My father didn't say that the women killed him in any particular way. What he said they did was they took him out to the horse barn to show him a beautiful horse that he might like to buy or own, and he never returned from the horse barn. We know that he vanished, and we know his name was Captain George Holler. He was a Prussian mercenary, and he disappeared.
Woods was now a full-time country doctor. He had a number of associate doctors who worked with him and maintained an office in the downtown drugstore, as well as the second floor of his home.
When Dr. Woods was, I guess it was after the war, he would have to go out at night to deliver a baby or see a sick person or something. And one of the things that I remembered Papa told me was about this man that was breaking a horse. And he was fixing to put shoes on him, and he had him there, and the horse kicked him and kicked the man in the head and fractured his skull. And the people said, "Now, Dr. Woods, you can't do anything for him." And he said, Well, we'll just see whether I can or not. And he opened the wound, took the bone structures out of his skull, and sewed him back up, and the man lived to be older than Grandpa. I remember Papa telling us that story and how glad he was that man survived for so many years.
One of the things I remember being told about Dr. Woods' compassion as a physician was that when a patient was terribly ill or injured and his medical treatment was not having any effect and death was imminent, that he would embrace the patient and take them and fold them up in his arms, and he would implore God to heal them through a miracle if possible.
Georgia died in 1872, and Peter Woods remarried 2 years later to Ella Reeves Ogletree. Dr. Woods also became involved in real estate, buying, building, and selling a number of properties in and near San Marcos. By 1885, he was listed as one of the largest taxpayers in Hays County. Dr. Woods was often called upon by Commissioner's Court to treat prisoners and lunatics at the county jail. In 1886, the first reunion of the 32nd Regiment was held in San Marcos, and the newspaper reported that it was the largest gathering ever held in this place, with between 2,500 and 5,000 people in attendance. It had been 26 years since the end of the war. After waiting so long, reunions became an annual event, with meetings in Seguin, Luling, and San Antonio. Dr. Woods was well respected in San Marcos and often called upon to speak at public gatherings and events. He was an active Mason for all of his adult life and an elder of the Methodist Church.
January 27, 1898, Colonel Dr. Peter Cavanaugh Woods died. He was a devout Methodist and a great patriot for this country and for the state of Texas. His funeral apparently attracted hundreds and hundreds of people from all over Central Texas and was held in the Methodist Church where he had attended for so many years.
All of the downtown stores in San Marcos closed for his funeral, and the crowds extended for blocks from the services at the Methodist Church. Captain Ferg Kyle of the United Confederate Veterans, P.C. Woods Camp, presided at the memorial service. It was the largest funeral held in San Marcos to that date. Woods is buried in the San Marcos Cemetery. In 1907, the United Daughters of the Confederacy dedicated a monument on the east side of the courthouse grounds to Colonel Woods. It was a large water fountain that is still the only memorial located directly on the courthouse grounds.
When I was a little girl, which was in the 20s or 1930s, sometime during that period, I remember going to San Marcos, and here was this monument on the, I think it was the east side of the square. And I wondered about it, and Papa said, well, that's in honor of your great-grandfather. And I said, well, what did he do?
This monument is a tribute to the doctor and colonel who played such an important role in the 19th century development of Hays County.